Looks like Miss Kennedy arrived.
So do we have Mr. Weddleton with us? Doesn't look like it.
Looks like you're the boss.
All right, well, we might as well get started. Okay, so I will go ahead and start this meeting. Let's see. Okay, we're already being recorded, so confirm that. So this is a meeting of the Community and Economic Development Committee. It is Thursday, April the 8th. And so I will call this to order. If we could get roll call, Mandy, that would be great.
It's actually Kiana. I am covering for her today.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry, Kiana.
No, that's totally fine. Okay, so Mr. Weddleton? Miss Kennedy?
Here.
Oh, sorry, you are here. Perfect. Miss Kennedy?
Oh, good. Okay, here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Miss Solotel?
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Mr. Weddleton, did you want to chair this? I just started, got us going here. Did you want to take over?
Well, I think you're doing great.
So far, so good. I did roll call. Woohoo. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you, Kiana. I know we have lots of other folks with us, and has kind of been my method. If you do want to speak, please make sure that you introduce yourself. I know that we've got several staff members here, so without trying to have everybody kind of tell us who's here, I think it's going to be easier if we just have people identify themselves when they do speak. So anyway, on the agenda, we've got first up is the Voodoo Cannabis Company. That's a special land use permit modification case. So I believe we might just go ahead and start with Mr. Yell on this one.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Madam Chair. So this is a request for a modification to a special land use permit for a marijuana cultivation facility to expand its licensed premises area into adjoining units H and K. The facility currently occupies units D and J, and this expansion will add approximately 1,815 square feet to the licensed premises area, which is an increase of approximately 93.6%. When compared to the existing licensed area. The final total square footage of the cultivation facility will be 3,754 square feet. And the existing facility was approved by the Assembly on November 7, 2017. And this modification is the second requested modification to the licensed premises area. Previous modification was approved by the Assembly on August 26th of 2020. And that was for a 100% expansion at the time. The petition site is located southeast of the intersection of King Street and East 77th Avenue. Planning Department has evaluated the application, and we do recommend approval. And I'd be happy to take any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yell. Do we have any questions from the members here? Let me check here. I've got the chat. And for the record, we do have Jamie Allard with us. Any questions?
I got a couple.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
Is it correct? Were there any NOVs for this operation?
Are you asking me? Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm going with Ryan Yell now, but I see
Ms. Howard's on the line, yes.
So that's good. We could work our way to Ryan.
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair, we don't have any documented NOVs for this location.
Okay, and then one for you, but I think if the applicant is probably better able to speak to this, but we've had added to a number of marijuana licenses, or not licenses, but the special land use permits when they were in strip malls and the walls didn't go all the way up to the roof decking. A requirement that the walls go to the roof decking so that no one can crawl over into the unit from an adjacent unit. And I wonder, is that an issue in this warehouse? Do your walls go up to the roof decking where your where your units are next to another owner?
There's no drop ceiling. The walls go all the way to the ceiling.
They go all the way up?
Yep.
All the way up to the roof decking?
All the way up.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any other questions? See somebody popping into the chat here. So yeah, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just wondering, I didn't get a chance to drive by there. What business used to be in the area that you're overtaking? Was there a previous marijuana business in there, or what business was in there?
In Unit H, it was a welder, kind of kept that as his storage place for his stuff. He didn't run his business out of there, he just kept his stuff there. And then on Unit K, it was a auto detailer.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay, any other questions? Last call. And applicant, I looked up your name earlier. It's Colleen Howard, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any other comments, Ms. Howard?
I have no comments, no.
Okay, great. All right. Then what is the will of the committee on this particular modification application?
I'd move to recommend approval.
I'd second that.
Second.
All right. Is there any objection? So
I have a quick comment on it.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
Just looking in general, it's good to see a business growing. You know, we have hard times. We were in a recession and then COVID hit, and it's nice to see something growing. And I kind of watching this where they start off small and then they grew another unit and now a couple more units. Seems like a very careful, prudent kind of business operation here. So good work. Looks good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, it's been moved and seconded and no objection. So Ms. Howard, we make the recommendation then to approve this at the assembly level. And I believe this one is on the agenda for this week. Kiana, would you happen to be able, or maybe even Ryan, could either one of you confirm that it's on this next week's agenda?
I saw that it was there.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, so there you have your answer then. It will definitely be on next Tuesday's agenda, and the full assembly will have the opportunity to vote on it, but it will go forward with the committee's recommendation. So
Thank you very much.
all right, thanks, Ms. Howard.
Could I jump in on it, Ms. Howard, before you leave? If I could have a moment, Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
The next topic on the agenda is to look at various changes in the marijuana law, and we've been doing this for a number of months. And I just wonder, from Ms. Howard, are you aware that we're looking at changes, and how do you keep up with kind of what the assembly might be doing with the marijuana laws?
So I keep up with them by listening in on assembly meetings, trying to follow the information they put out on AMCO. It would be nice if we could get someone who could condense it and get it out there a little more, I don't want to say less technical. When you read updates like on AMCO about what the changes might be, or in the Muni website, it just refers to statutes or regulations, and it's time consuming and not always easy to follow what the changes are being proposed. So it'd be nice if we could get something a little better than that. I know what you're asking. It's a job to keep up for sure.
What is okay? Thanks. And we've been working on it, and ultimately it'll come out, and it'll always be in some kind of ordinance speak, which is challenging. But there's usually an AM with it, or will be an AM that explains in more normal English when it finally comes out. But I just appreciate that. I just want to know how much word gets out amongst, everybody's busy running their business, and we want to, help you be involved.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. Yeah, I know it falls back on us too. We've got to attend these meetings and keep our ear to the ground for sure.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Thank you, Ms. Howard. Okay, then we will move on to the rest of our business, just like Mr. Weddleton was talking about, the Title 10 and Title 21 changes. So I don't know if there's a preference about where we want to jump in here. We might be ready to look more at the Title 21 stuff, but Mr. Weddleton, did you have a preference on where we want to pick up at this point?
No, and I didn't have a clear note on where we left off, but I think I could probably figure it out. But one thing we had looked at, I think we had a long discussion on the fines, and Jack Frost had recommended a list, basically make everything $500 or $500 a day where it was relevant. And I think we left off with that where we wanted to do more research and get it out to the industry a little bit, and or at least to the industry organization, get some feedback on that and give it some more thought. But that'll be somewhat complex, I think. I mean, 500 a day, if we go with that, that's actually pretty simple, and I think that's what they're looking for, code enforcement. But so that was lingering, and then if we could continue to work through the document, but I think we had passed by this section on the various chemicals and so on. And since we have health department with us, maybe jump back to that while they're here. Okay,
thank you. Yeah, good idea. Yeah, that was kind of one of our questions too, and I agree. I think we do want that conversation about the fees and fines, and but yes, since we have, let's see, who do we have with us from the health department? I'm looking here, and okay, well. Okay. Oh, okay. Jeff Hickman raised his hand. Great. Thank you. Okay. So if we want to just move into that conversation, what can somebody tell me, maybe Dean, or if you have it in front of you, John, what section of the code where we were actually talking more about the chemicals and that, and then we will be able to kind of coordinate that and then let Jeff talk to us more about how concerned they are about particular chemicals. So,
Madam Chair, I put myself in the queue before we jumped into this. I apologize for interrupting.
No,
may I make a quick comment?
No,
thanks. I just wanted to mention while Ms. Howard was on with us, I'm not sure she's going to stick with us, but I'll ask that we ultimately do a crosswalk between the old code and the new code, which is a chart comparing the changes. So that is a tool we have and one that we usually use when we put forward large regulatory or ordinance changes. So that should be coming as we get closer to a final format. And that's a great tool. It doesn't mean we're done yet. And that's a great tool that you can use to help provide more feedback. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, that's a great idea, and I appreciate that. And thank you for bringing that up too, because, well, the fact that my queue here is I have to flip pages to keep up with it, and that's really awkward. So thank you for just butting in. That's fine. So, but I see now that I've flipped the page that we have Mr. Peterson in the queue as well.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just we were talking about the fines a minute ago, and I had a number of emails back and forth between Jack Frost and myself, and we were discussing the fine situation. And the industry has been so responsive, and we've had a very limited number of violations that we couldn't see that there would be an advantage to increasing the fines, that we didn't see a reason for that. You know, if we were having problems and we thought we needed to increase the fine to get compliance, then, you know, that's when you would probably do that. But we don't seem to be having problems getting compliance. And so raising the fines just seems to be unnecessary to me. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I would agree with you on that. That's why I think we do need to take the time to look at the fines. So let's put that on the next agenda for sure, specifically. And then maybe we'll all have had a chance to really look over those specific numbers to see which ones might need to change and which ones don't, or whatever. So I do think we need to have that bigger conversation. Mr. Gates, I would say yes, please put the AO draft up on the screen for us. And Mr. Constant, you are in the queue, so go ahead.
Yeah, just riffing on what Pete said, and I agree, Ms. Kennedy, it's good to review through all of the penalties and the processes that we have for discipline and order in the industry, because we have at least once or twice had to be pretty assertive in our kind of requirement of discipline, but it proved to be a bit challenging. And so I think that, I don't know that increasing the fines might be the right path, or maybe creating a scalable fine system, or coming up with an alternative that allows kind of the code enforcement team more options. But that's certainly welcome in a conversation that we have going over what exists.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, great. So it looks like we are lined up with the portion of the policy that we left off of last time, which had us talking about all these chemicals. So I think I'm trying to remember what the main question was about this. And I think part of it was, do these all, is this an accurate schedule of chemicals and acceptable levels? Do we need to add more, take away, whatever? So I think at this point, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Hickman and let him tell us kind of how this relates to what the health department does. Mr. Hickman, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jeff Hickman with the Environmental Health Program. As far as what we regulate at the health department, we regulate pretty much just retail only. So we're looking at only prepackaged products and the concentrates and how they're packaged and stored, and the little kitchen areas in the shops themselves, and that's about it. So we don't regulate cultivation or production at all. DEC regulates production. So anytime somebody makes a product and puts it in a package, that's inspected by DEC. And cultivation is only done by, as far as I know, AMCO regulates cultivation and does inspections there. So as far as the pesticide lists and stuff, it's fine if it matches what the state is requiring, then it'll be fine, because when the state inspects that, they're probably only looking at their code anyway and not our code. So so that's really all I've got on that.
Okay, well, thank you. And please stand by, because we'll probably have some other member questions. I don't see anybody in the queue right now, but if anybody remembers kind of what some of the more specific questions were, please chime in at this point. And maybe it's enough to say exactly what you did. So, okay, let me see.
No, I
Mr. Weddleton, go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having trouble flipping back and forth.
Me too.
So Mr. Hickman, is it your sense that we we simplify things by several pages, I think, if we just remove this section and just said follow state law? I guess that's a question to you and also Dean. If we don't enforce it, can we simplify this?
Okay, well, I don't know if Mr. Hickman wants to follow up on that, but I do have Mr. Gates in the queue, so maybe we'll let Mr. Gates jump in here real quick. So go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm listening to Mr. Hickman and how he described inspections and how they're really done by the state, and the state looking at its own regulations and its own list of pesticides. It really seems like this is sort of code without much value. And so I was just starting to write here on the screen, as you can see, that maybe we can take out our list and just say it's deemed to fail if it, a sample is deemed to fail the pesticide contamination test if it's detected above the acceptable levels specified in the state regulation. You know, I think then, and perhaps we have the cross-reference to that state regulation, whatever it is. And I think that this would simply leave it open to, well, wherever we find a test result, or know if it's valid and authentic, and from a testing lab or from the state DEC or whatever, this just says, well, they failed because it doesn't follow the state regulation. We can get rid of our own list and delete the rest instead of the specified below part. So as the state maybe updates and so forth, we just have this cross-reference that follows whatever updating they do on their end, and we don't have to worry about trying to update ours to match periodically. And I think that that's a very valid and common way to actually do regulation of this type. But I wonder what Mr. Hickman thought of this idea.
I think it's great because yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it's kind of regulations that no one in the municipality is actually going to enforce. So unless somebody much higher than me decides that environmental health is now going to get into cultivation and all that, which I don't think we really have the manpower to do. So, but right now, yeah, AMCO does all of the cultivation, and Department of Environmental Conservation, their environmental health folks do all of the production, because in their code, they can't delegate us things that are wholesale. So they inspect all wholesale operations, even inside of Anchorage, since they're not allowed to delegate that authority to us. So that's why they're doing the production of marijuana inside of Anchorage, because it's considered wholesale by AMCO.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So this section 5 that's on page 25 of document I'm looking at, and just says other contamination, a sample of marijuana concentrate, et cetera, and so on, considered to fail the test for other contamination, if in the opinion of the director of the Anchorage Health Department, ... So is that section relevant to keep in there? Seems like that opens the door in case there's something not listed that seems egregious.
It's probably always good to keep that kind of stuff in there so you can, get us into action if there is something terrible that needs to be acted on immediately, faster than the state can do it.
Okay. I wondered, and maybe Mr. Conson remembers better, but the thing with the one business that had the contaminated product, I mean, we were, and maybe Dean remembers, but we were involved with that at some level, weren't we? Or was that just we responded to the state identifying a bad sample?
Yeah, for the most part, we didn't deal with that.
And
We did on the licensing side. We heard about it.
On the license, okay.
And at our level in the health department, we would assist the state with a recall if they asked us to.
And wasn't the one with the contaminated products wasn't even in the Muni, was it?
I think it was. Wasn't it tested in a lab?
Yeah, it was out of town. That's what I seem to recall. The products were here. There was another one that we had where a license was transferred, and one of the previous licensees had a number of contaminated products, but I don't think that process has actually been concluded through the state. And and that was a license that we did allow to be transferred for a grow operation. And so actually might be good to get a follow-up on that at some point. I don't know if y'all remember that. I don't want to say any names, but
Okay,
it was over off King Street.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, so thoughts then? I guess it looks like we want to eliminate the list of chemicals, but we want to keep section 5 that just includes other contaminants as well, as long as it designates the state's involvement with that. So I don't know if you've been able to track what Dean is putting out here for us, but I think I'm in agreement with where he's been going with the comments here. Any other thoughts?
That looks good. I mean, if this whole section refers mostly to state, it looks this
Mhm.
section 5 probably needs to refer back to that as well.
Yeah, so he's including that phrase. So. Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Hickman, or any other questions for Mr. Hickman?
I don't have anything else.
Thank you. Well, you are more than welcome to stick around with us, but I think we are going to move on. I don't see anybody in the queue. So, Mr. Gates, can you just keep us moving on this one, please?
Sure, I will do my best. So I did mark where we stopped last time. We actually got down here to page 27. So we're on the section about cultivation facilities, their privileges and prohibited acts. And we identified, a couple of spots we missed, changing the state's language to match the municipality rather than the state's board and so forth. So here I was starting to review this, and this morning, and this part is the prohibited acts, and this new language here in B1 is simply allowing the state's regulation change. And looking at it, it's a whole bunch of verbiage that basically says if you have multiple licenses, they've got to be separately operated in separate rooms. You know, you can't commingle in the same space. So your cultivation can get a product manufacturing and retail license. Don't mix them up though. So I didn't really see anything. Whoops. I'm sorry, I'm reading the captions. I don't know if people have the Teams captioning feature on, but it's just mistranslated me. Anyway. I am not sure why this language is being deleted in the state reg, but it is, but I assume that it's addressed elsewhere anyways. You know, the cultivation facilities aren't allowed to extract for product manufacturing. That's a product manufacturing license, but the basic idea is each license says what you can and can't do. If it's not there, you can't do it. And so, let's see, we have page 28. Limitations on, you know, the acceptance and transmittal of the marijuana product to the premises. I don't really have anything to add here. It's just tracking the state regulation changes.
Any questions at this point from the members? Proceed, Mr. Gates.
Okay, and actually, I wanted to go back and address when in the earlier discussion, Ms. Salatel asked for a crosswalk in the AM. So I made a note of that to try and put that together for you, and that we're going to talk about fines at the next committee meeting. So I just wanted to note that. So here on next section, the marijuana handler permit being required. And again, this is simply tracking state regulation changes for some of the language. I guess, to me, they're just mincing some words to make it more clear. And that makes sense. Everybody that works there has got to get a handler permit, the licensee and each employee. And it doesn't say agent, I believe, because that might be some contractors who, or who aren't really handling marijuana, but just come and deliver or maybe do some remodel work, stuff like that. So, anyway, and we don't really deal much with the marijuana handler permits on the municipal side, other than to verify that the employees have them at the retail stores, I believe. But I shouldn't comment too much on the enforcement actions and activities. That's just sort of my understanding. So restricted access areas.
Actually, I could be back up a moment.
Sure.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton, you have
A little bit. So the previous page, I think it's 28. So this section, line 37, A1. So each licensing, it's the wording has changed. It's a little puzzling. Obtains a marijuana handler permit as provided by state statute before being licensed or employed at the marijuana cultivation facilities licensed premises. So if it's already a licensed premise, is it before being licensed referring? We changed the word present to licensed, and that seems puzzling to me. I mean, if it's already a licensed premise, then it's licensed already. And what we're really talking about is an individual before they are, I don't know, it's confusing to me.
I agree. That language does sound a little confusing.
I think it's not referring to the facility. I think it's referring to the individual, right?
That's the way I read it, that it's the
And
marijuana
yeah,
handler
so
permit.
yeah, it's like before they have a license or are employed.
Right.
You know, they may be present in the place in the process of seeking a job and getting their certification and licensure, but anyhow, I don't know, but that's how I read it.
But are they, individuals aren't licensed, are they? I mean, the facility is.
They're granted a handler's permit, and so they're permitted.
So isn't it called a license or is it just called a permit? I mean, are we just having a discussion about the actual term?
Yes, it's a handler's permit, right?
So maybe we should change that word licensed. And Dean, we're down there in A1, that term licensed that was replaced for the word present. Yes. And should that word licensed be permitted before being permitted or employed? So that's what I think everybody's saying is throwing this off.
So,
a bit.
well, if I may.
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Gates.
I mean, I have no argument that this language is confusing, but I believe that the intent is pretty clear. It sort of mixes up a couple of situations into one section and tries to handle them all at once. That's why I think there's some confusion. But if it's a licensee, obviously A1 says you need to get your marijuana handler permit before you obtain your license, right? And then A2 is, licensee or employee. But the employee, before you're employed there, and then each of them need to have it if you're on site on premises. The first part about an agent who's required or permitted. I should go back and look at the state reg change on this, because I agree that part about agent seems to be read overbroad. But I think the intent is pretty clear, although the language and verbiage is sort of confusing here.
Okay, so Mr. Gates, this particular portion is being impacted by changes to the state regulations as well. So that's why we have that particular language in there right now, because of what's already being done at the state level. Or is this just our own change?
Hold on just a second there.
We're just making up a number.
Oh, here's the state reg that this language is tracking, and yeah, exactly right. We're tracking this exactly. So for the edits that you just saw, each agent, each licensee
I understand.
obtains the permits before being licensed or employed and has the permits in the person's possession. Now, remember, this is all prefaced by the cultivation facility. You know, this is the premises. They need to ensure that these facts are true, that each one has obtained their permit before being there and has it in their possession when they're on site. But, you know, for whatever it's worth, state regulations and state statutes, sometimes their drafting isn't entirely clear. You know, they made sausage by committee out there, and we're just kind of tracking our regulation changes. That's the purpose of our ordinance. So we tracked this pretty closely.
Well, that helps. I mean, that tells me specifically that the reason why we're using that language is because the state is already doing that. So I think we might be kind of stuck with it. Any other comments on that?
Well, I don't think we should be bashful about improving on their wording if we meet the intent. It just, each licensee has a marijuana permit before being licensed. Well, you're not a licensee yet. You haven't got your permit.
How about a potential licensee?
Yeah, it's almost like one. I mean, if it matches state code, we're kind of stuck in some ways. But if you took that part one, so we're breaking it out. It seems like one does overlaps with part two there. So if you just make one, obtains a marijuana handler permit as provided by state statute before being licensed, period. And then two says, whoever's on that premise has to have their marijuana handler permit card available. So it seems like it gets the same place with that, but a little more clear.
John, I think you're right. There is some redundancy in that before being licensed, that whole line could just go away. Obtains a marijuana permit as provided. You know, I think you get there before being employed, because the permit itself is the license, and so it's redundant.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Zolotel?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I guess I've never, the way I read this section is that the handler permit is required, but isn't the handler permit isn't just the license. So I guess I feel like that's a little bit of that convolutes the thing, quite frankly. I guess I would be okay just referring to state regulation, but other than that, I would be a little bit worried about changing the language, because this really, the permit, I mean, I could have if I understand this correctly, I could have a marijuana handler permit because I'm an employee. Does my marijuana handler permit tie back to that specific license, or does my marijuana handler permit travel with me if I were to obtain employment in a different location?
Well, that's a good question, and I guess we could use some clarification on that. But I don't believe that the license or the permit is tied to any licensed operation. Your permit is your own permit. So does somebody want to see a hand raise? Miss Howard.
Hi, yeah, so your permit's like your driver's license.
If any.
Go ahead.
Great, yes, I think so. So thank you. Mr. Gates?
Well, this section is about cultivation facilities and how they operate. And, you know, if somebody on the, who's working there as an employee and doesn't have a permit, or they violate this section, that violation isn't the person without the permit. Maybe they'll violate something else somewhere else, but specifically this section is saying, well, the licensee for this cultivation facility has an employee without the handler permit, they get a fine. And I just looked it up. It's a $50 fine for that. And if the licensee who, is the holder of the cultivation facility license doesn't have their permit, maybe they didn't expire, didn't get it renewed. And again, the handler permit is, taking a course with the state and obtaining it there and getting it. And that's sort of different than the whole cultivation facility license process. But I guess that we want the people who own and operate the facilities, the licensees, to understand what everybody is supposed to know and do and function, and therefore to have a permit also, the handler permit. So if theirs expire, they don't have it, they violate, A1, they haven't got it while their license for the facility is effective. So I just wanted to sort of point out, this isn't about, the employee getting their permit and not having it. It's about the facility making sure all their employees on their payroll who are going to be at the facility working have that handler permit. And if they don't, there's a fine for violating section here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gates. Let's see, did we have somebody else in the queue on this one? No, but there is a note in there just from Ms. Weltzine about the handler permit. Travel based on location is not tied to facilities like the tap cards. So I think we have confirmed our thoughts on that one. So anything else on this one? Should we, Mr. Weddleton, if you think there's a good way to improve it, that would, now would be a good time to mention it, but it looks like it actually does suit the purpose of the title, which is marijuana handler permit required. So any other thoughts on this one?
Well, yeah, I think where it gets, maybe where it's looking at it, trying to look at it carefully here, but when it says ensure that each agent who is required or permitted physically present and licensed premises at any time, then we add this word each licensee and each employee. But I guess it goes back to what is an agent? Because we're really talking, if agent is defined as licensee and employee, then we should not add those words, because I think that's kind of what throws us into this redundant loop.
Okay, Mr. Gates, do we have a definition for agent in the ordinance?
I don't think so. I think it's sort of using the commonly understood legal definition of agent. And I have to acknowledge that, that's maybe a poor use of the word agent there. Like I said, I think I'll make a note to look at this more carefully.
Okay.
I would also mention, though, that Ms. Weltzine, who had commented in the chat earlier, I agree with what she said about the handler permit. It travels with the person. They can be employed at different locations. It's up to the facility to make sure who they hire has that permit before they hire them. And then she pasted a definition from state regulation for agent. And I guess we might have that in code as well. So I could look that up.
Okay, well, in that sense, that word might actually be a little too broad. I don't know that we're expecting all employees to be able to act on behalf of a board or a director. But anyway, we can talk a little bit more about that. I have a couple people in the queue, so let me get to their comments or questions. Mr. Peterson, you're first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How about this language? Each licensee applicant and each employee applicant. That would make it a little more easily understood, I think. How's that sound?
Okay, let's if you throw that in there, Mr. Gates, can we take a look at that for discussion purposes?
If I could comment on that.
Yes, please.
I guess for the cultivation facility, who this section applies to, they can screen employee applicants. But when you say licensed applicant, that's the application for a license is filed with the MUNI and state, not filed with the municipal cultivation facility. I guess so. I guess the language works okay. I'm just not sure it's an improvement, but it's a different way of saying the same thing. If it reads clearer to folks, that's fine.
Well, it kind of throws me because the term applicant assumes that somebody hasn't actually been permitted, they're just applying. And I guess that's where I feel like we might be muddying the waters even more.
Well, if I may, sometimes you interview and hire somebody, but you have conditions, and one condition could be you can't start working until you get the permit. So maybe it's just a condition of the employment before employment actually begins. So I guess that's why I think calling them applicant is a little premature at the stage to require the permit. But just one way of sort of rectifying the language.
Okay, I believe Mr. Constant, you're in the queue as well, so why don't you jump in here?
I'll run past, thanks.
Okay. All right, well, do we want to keep
Crystal,
working right now, or shall we just think about it a bit and call it up at the next meeting and maybe give people an opportunity to mull this over a little bit more? Mr. Weddleton, you had a comment?
well, I think that would be fine. I'd ask you to read the comments that were in the chat that were referred to, just to get them on the record.
Thank you. We did have another comment from Ms. Weltzine, and she just mentioned that the agent in state regulations is defined as means a representative who is authorized to act for a licensee, the board, or the director. And Mr. Gates put in a Muni Code definition for agent, which says means a representative who is authorized to act for a licensee, the assembly, or the municipal clerk as context requires, includes a contractor or subcontractor. So there are definitions that exist both in the state regulations and in the Muni definitions. So I guess we might want to decide if that is an accurate definition for using that term in that context that we see it in this particular ordinance. Mr. Constant, go ahead.
Yeah, in the case that we're talking about, it makes no sense. The attorney who has power of attorney for the corporation certainly doesn't need a handler's permit, nor would an HVAC contractor or subcontractor that's working within the organization. It wouldn't make any sense to have them required to have a handler's permit to come inside and do work.
Yeah, I agree. That is odd. Is Miss Howard still here? I'd be curious if she has someone come in to repair the equipment if they have a handler's permit. Well, I guess I don't want to get her in trouble if that's the rule. So.
I don't. Yeah,
Madam Chair, Ms. Howard has her hand
Ms.
up.
Howard, yes, go ahead, Ms. Howard.
Perhaps you could speak for a friend.
Ms. Howard, I don't know if you heard the question or not, but yeah, you do have your hand up, so I'm hoping that you can comment. If you're trying to comment, you might just need to unmute. So
I apologize. Can you tell me the question one more time?
Mr. Weddleton, Mr. Weddleton asked if you had a contractor of some sort, somebody that came in to address your HVAC system problems, would that person be required to have a handler's permit? Would you?
No, they have to be escorted and they have to wear a sign in and have a visitor's badge, but they aren't required to have a marijuana handler's permit. If they're not touching marijuana, They're not handling it, making any decisions about it. They're just working in the facility on the floor or the HVAC system or whatever. They just must be escorted and they must sign in, sign out, and wear a visitor's badge.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, did you have any other questions on follow up on that?
Well, no, but I think that speaks to what Mr. Constant had said too. Using that phrase agent as it's defined in our code is not really workable here.
Right, it's just too broad. So we do have another comment in the chat by Ms. Weltzine. It says if they don't have a handler permit, then they would need to be a visitor and sign in and be supervised by an agent who is required to have the handler card of the facility. So we always treat contractors as visitors. So exactly what Ms. Howard was explaining to us as well. Mr. Constant, are you back in the queue?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, the disconnect, the logical disconnect with the policy as it's written is the section is under marijuana handlers, and it captures everyone who walks in the door by virtue of the breadth of the language. And really, it should be tightly tied to those who have a function handling marijuana, right? And so I think that whatever final language we settle on, that should be the principle that we adhere to. Under the marijuana handler section is only those employees who have a requirement or need at any point in their flow of their work to actually handle marijuana.
So we need to go back to that term, permitted licensee or permitted employee, get rid of the agent term.
Well, agent definitely needs to go. And I think a focus on licensee and employee should be in there. And I think partly because it's in the state code. And but I think Mr. Constant's right. Just make this very clear that licensees, employees who touch marijuana have to have a permit.
Right, because you could actually hire a bookkeeper, right, who is an employee of the company, but they never have to, in their job, handle marijuana. Does the bookkeeper need to go through the marijuana handling class and get a permit? It doesn't make sense unless, of course, they have other duties as assigned, and in those duties, they have to handle marijuana.
No, that makes sense to me. So, yeah, we just need to not use the term agent. So. Okay.
So if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Gates. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I gotta disagree with all of you. I think that the term agent is really necessary here, except just the use of it here needs to be narrowed a little bit. And you know, the code definition, I think the code definition is okay, except in this context for 1084-25 that we're looking at, that yes, it should be agents who's only there for purposes of handling marijuana product, and not agents who are there like subcontractors who are doing some remodeling on that or fixing the HVAC. And as Ms. Wilson had pointed out, and I pulled up that section recently, restricted access areas in any of the facilities, including cultivation, have a visitor requirement, and that's there. So if it's an HVAC repair person, I guess the downside is each visitor has to be escorted at all times by someone who's a licensee or employer or agent. So I guess there's a little roundabout way of looking at it, but if they don't have their handler permit, you can have them escorted, and that, of course, is probably very inconvenient to have someone watching an HVAC repairman at all times. But anyways, my fix and why I disagree with removing agent is instead just wordsmithing a little bit here. I guess that's sort of what I'm supposed to do. And I've here, while we were talking, put this here to modify the term agent who's required or permitted to be there on premises for purposes of handling marijuana or marijuana product. You know, so if they're there, an independent contractor who's an agent, you know, maybe they're there to transport the marijuana somewhere else, and they come in and pick up the bins, pick up the product, or maybe they package a little bit and then move it, and they're not an employee or licensee, but they're an agent. That's an independent contractor, perhaps. They got to have their handling permit to do that because they're there for some purpose of handling product. And I think that narrows, the term agent here sufficiently to meet the purpose and meet the intent of the state regulation as well. So that's just my perspective. Rather than getting rid of the word agent, you leave a little loophole. And I think instead you narrow the word agent so that you don't have that loophole, but you also aren't being overbroad.
I think that works.
Yeah, that looks pretty good. Appreciate that, Dean.
Okay, so, all right, if we settle on that, then anything else on this section before we move on? Okay, Mr. Gates, let's move into the restricted access area section.
And I had recently put up some code section, about that, and that's in the section I pulled up is mentioned here in A. So I got to comply with that. That applies to all facilities, not just cultivation. But here, cultivation specific changes were related to outdoor production. And I'm sorry, that should probably say cultivation. I actually am going to check the state statute if they also used the wrong word. State reg, I'm sorry.
Okay.
This was just allowing them to take place, maybe not in a solid structure, but non-rigid greenhouses or other structures. I think this was some issue that came up at the state level from elsewhere. We're just, again, tracking the state regulation update. So maybe this is a big thing to consider for the Anchorage area, and we can't prohibit it. We can be more restrictive. So kind of a policy call if the assembly wants to track this part of the state reg or not.
Thank you. I'm sure we've got some comments on this. I know we talked a little bit about it in the past, just the idea of how we allow greenhouse type structures for cultivation. And I know there were some concerns about what that looks like in terms of security, or whether or not now we've got people building huge fences or whatever. So anyway, I'll just open it up for a minute. If there's any comment on this, or if we're good with this particular phrase right now, then we'll move on. But any thoughts?
Weddleton, it makes me a little nervous, and partly we have restrictions on fence heights. So if we were to allow this, we'd have to address that as well, because I think if you have a commercial property next to a residential, you're limited to like a 4-foot fence, which wouldn't work here. I mean, one thing, the moose would get in and eat all this. So this could get very complicated. I think this alone would be a real challenge. If, at least 6 feet high. That's not very high.
And the smell.
Okay, Mr. Yell, you've got you're in the queue on this, so please jump in.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So this is Ryan Yell from the Planning Department. So just a couple of thoughts on this one. Just the language non-rigid greenhouse. It kind of goes against building safety codes. So I'd rather just stick to more broad language saying outdoor greenhouse. And then as far as the fence restriction, maybe just keeping the language so that its outdoor production must be enclosed by a site obscuring wall or fence. Because depending upon the zoning district that the cultivation facility is in, whether that's B3 or whether that's an industrial district, if it's in an industrial district, there's some provisions that allow them to go up to 8 feet high. So I think that the overarching regulations for fence height should just be what's already in code.
Perfect. And I think that's exactly what Mr. Weddleton was getting at. So yeah, we'll need to address that here in the language. So good points. Thank you. and something else to think about just in terms of what else we might need to add to this. Or just say that, we will align with other muni code dependent on the zoning. Let's see. Mr. Gates put in the chat the regulation from the state regulations, which is 3 AAC 306.430B. A marijuana cultivation facility shall conduct any marijuana growing operation within a fully enclosed, secure indoor facility or greenhouse with rigid walls, a roof, and doors. Where not prohibited by local government, outdoor production may take place in non-rigid greenhouses, other structures, or an expanse of open or cleared ground fully enclosed by a physical barrier. To obscure public view of the premises, outdoor production must be enclosed by a side obscuring wall or fence at least 6 feet high. So the language there is coming straight out of that regulation. However, we have the ability to adapt that to our own local codes. Ms. Zolotel, go ahead.
Thank you. So I have a hard time reconciling B with B1 because we have this wording, fully enclosed, secure indoor facility. And we know that secure indoor facility is quite secure. So I guess I want to ensure that it's a secure outdoor cultivation space in some manner, because I want to ensure that the security plans also deal with this. 6 foot high fence or whatever Title 21 allows I don't know if that'll be enough. We haven't done this. I guess I just want to think through, is there enough in Title 21 to fully secure an outdoor enclosed area for cultivation purposes?
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Let's see, looks like we've got Mr. Constant next, and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. I'm fully in support of allowing operations to grow outdoors, but I don't think we're going to be able to do this in the municipality because of smell. And, already our indoor facilities have a very difficult time complying with the smell requirements. And an outdoor facility is going to, on a few times of the year, be very robust and impossible to manage. And so I don't know where there are swaths of land big enough that you could do this and not impact your neighbors. So I'm skeptical of this whole section. While I support that conceptually, practically.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that Mr. Constant brought up. But also speaking from experience, I think just a fence, someone can drive a car through a fence pretty easy and get in there, and this whole thing makes me feel very vulnerable. Yeah, I have a hard time supporting this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Well, then are we deciding that we're really not going to allow outdoor facilities, even though the state allows it? And I certainly understand from the state's perspective, there's certainly a lot of places out in the Mat-Su Valley that can do this a little easier than the Anchorage Bowl area. So anyway, do we want to just see this go away?
Madam Chair, can I put myself in the queue? Can I suggest one more thing?
Sure, go ahead.
So I'm wondering if we can somehow do this to start, and I don't know, and I guess this would be a good question for the industry, but if this were an option, is it possible, that their plans that they submit to the assembly, if they want to seek outdoor cultivation space, can address some of these security concerns? We've done that somewhat indoors in terms of like demising walls and the like, and similarly with odor. I guess I wouldn't say let's just delete it out, but let's give the industry some time to maybe provide us some information so that we can see what they can come up with. I think they're probably more the experts here, and we can see if that meshes with Title 21 and if we can reconcile those things. But I would prefer to flag it for their input and expertise right now and see if that starts to take care of some of our concerns. We can always revisit it, but I think once we say it's out, the conversation is over. The other piece to that is whether or not there's any appetite to do this. I don't know if there's industry appetite to try outdoor cultivation. I don't know. Winter seems to not be ending this year, so I don't know what this season looks like. So I guess I want to leave open the door enough to get that particular feedback.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Zalatel. I appreciate that. And you must be getting snowed on in Anchorage as well. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to miss you, Mr. Peterson. So please, you're on the queue. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to mention that here in East Anchorage, we have the old Alaska greenhouse property. And when Mr. Manleiser passed away, his heirs decided they were going to lease the greenhouse to someone else, and they expected that they were going to grow normal plants in there. As it turned out, they were growing marijuana, and they got busted because of the odor. And so the growing it in a greenhouse seems not to be able to much more difficult to control the odor. I would believe, and I just thought I'd bring that historical point up for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. And I remember that greenhouse. I used to winter over my roses in that greenhouse, so I miss them. You know, I think we do have the ability to restrict and regulate all of that within our land use permits now, and with the regulations for smell and security and everything else. So I think you're right, Ms. Zalatel, that we could open it up, and if somebody could actually find a way to do it that would comply with our current regulations, then, you know, maybe more power to them. But Mr. Yale, you have some comments, so please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of good points have been brought up, and I think from a practical standpoint, growing marijuana in a greenhouse is very difficult to do. For one, controlling odor; two, security; three, just the simple climate control within the greenhouse during the winter months is probably very costly, as well as controlling the light cycle in the summertime for cultivation. But it brings up an interesting point, you know, because it may not be practical, should it be prohibited in code? But at the same time, right now, there's nothing that prohibits growing marijuana within a greenhouse in current code. So I know that the intent of adding this is to bring us in line with state code, and also to make it clear in code that you can grow marijuana in a greenhouse, but I don't know if this is necessarily needed at this point to put this into code.
Thank you, Mr. Yale. Mr. Gates, you're next.
Thank you. I also listening to the discussion. It seems to me, you know, sort of drafting, as you can see on screen, while we were discussing this topic, that this is more a land use in Title 21 issue. And my sense is either you state clearly here it's prohibited, or it not be mentioned here. And I guess if it's not mentioned here in Title 10, that the state regulation language is we're prohibited by the local government. So if you're silent, you're not like explicitly prohibiting it, maybe implicitly, but some applicants got an argument. But I think that it's really a land use issue, and whether or not it should be included might be something better suitable to fit into Title 21, and maybe even more suitable to go through the Planning Zoning Commission. So, you know, for those practical issues of making it happen, what districts, what lot sizes, this is really a feasible thing to do. Having a physical barrier with the odor concerns and all that is something that the Planning and Zoning Commission's expertise is really more adaptable to for consideration. So, you know, I guess just my suggestion is either be silent here or don't say anything in this section, or prohibited with that last sentence that I drafted, and that could be amended out. And then either defer this issue to some later ordinance brought through the Planning and Zoning Commission process, or even by individual assembly member. Obviously a pretty contentious issue that maybe we just don't want to address with this ordinance that's generally an update.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. Okay, still mulling this over, thinking about this, but we have Mr. Constant next. So.
Thank you. I think that what I would like to see from Ryan and the team is what are some of the large scale tracts in town, in the municipality, not just in Anchorage proper, because I can't even imagine one in the in Anchorage proper, the city, where this could be achieved successfully without creating major conflicts with neighbors. I mean, I don't even know, like, what size, 1,000 foot by 1,000 foot, something very large it would take.
Yeah, Mr. Yell, do you want to take a jab at that one, or Ms. McNulty?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ed, Mr. Constant, was the question in regards to outdoor cultivation only?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really, I'm not exactly sure the separation distance you would need to achieve a smell buffer, but it's big.
Yeah, so through the chair, that's a great point, Mr. Constant. Yeah, and I really wouldn't even know where to start with how much distance you need for a smell buffer, but I would assume it's a long ways, especially, you know, marijuana does have a pretty pungent odor, so, you know, that carries a long ways. I will say that, you know, just outdoor cultivation of basically any crop in the Anchorage Bowl is very difficult. We have a number of folks that come to us from various organizations that want to start up some type of community garden or commercial horticulture operation that's outdoor, and they find a lot of difficulty in, one, finding a plot, and two, just making it profitable, just given our short growing season. So I think it's more, you know, if we were to see marijuana cultivation move into a greenhouse type facility, it would be a cultivation facility buying a location such as, you know, one of the existing greenhouses in operation right now, and then moving their operation there rather than trying to do it outdoors.
Thank you. Any follow-up on that then, Mr. Constant?
You know, I would like to hear from Jana if she's on the phone, but Michelle has her hand in the queue as well.
Oh, I didn't see the hand. So Ms. McNulty, go ahead.
Thank you. And through the chair, I was just going to kind of echo some of the things that Ryan just brought up. I think that the planning department would be challenged to do this research, because we don't know even, you know, what would be the size limits that a grower would need to have an outdoor facility, you know, pencil out. And so we would need a lot of information. So I just wanted to kind of echo what he said.
Okay, thank you. And I was going to call on Ms. Weltzing as well, but I've got Mr. Gates in the queue again. So let him go ahead, and then Ms. Weltzing, we'd like to pick your brain a bit. So go ahead, Mr. Gates.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I think all the impracticalities of having an open grow operation are, of course, challenging, and like everybody's mentioned, I don't think that's going to be something we're going to see any prudent business person or licensee propose here in the municipality of Anchorage. But, you know, this section wasn't just the open expanse, it's greenhouses, non-rigid structures. So this would be, I think, something you might see falling within this exception for an outdoor grow operation. But temporary structures like fabric tents, canvas tents, things like that, that maybe have some odor control and so forth, but, you know, not building code compliant floor walls and roof structures. So I think that that's more of what we might see. It's a feasible sort of business proposal in the municipality if we were going to allow it, you know. I just wanted to point out that distinction. So I didn't think that really we could, as a municipality, say, no, rigid greenhouses, other structures, and prohibit the expansive open or cleared ground. But I don't really see that happening anyways by somebody who wants to avoid getting fined constantly for odor and all that. So I'll pass it back.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. No, I appreciate that too. And I think there is obviously a difference between a greenhouse where you probably could provide some kind of security and, you know, obviously the ability to take advantage of natural light is really the benefit of a greenhouse. But you can do that, have a greenhouse and still have ventilation and odor control to a degree. And that would kind of be the question, I guess, as to what degree can you actually regulate odor control in something that maybe has more permeable materials in their walls. But anyway, let's Ms. Weltzine, if you're on with us, you know, just unmute. And I think one of the questions for you is, what kind of interest do you think is out there right now for having some kind of greenhouse grow capability?
Thank you. Through the chair, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I would say back in 2016, I was actually approached by a greenhouse facility in the municipality who wanted, who's having trouble, you know, making ends meet and wanted to consider adding this as a crop to their facility. I told them it wasn't, you know, going to be feasible because of, you know, this regulation. And also their zoning wasn't correct either. They weren't in an I-1 or an I-2 or not even a B3. So for that facility, it didn't work out for those reasons. But I would say that there could be an interest. There are facilities in town that would work. And also think about like, and I'm just throwing this out there, Uncle Herbs hasn't thought about this, but this is just one of the facilities that popped in my head. You know, Uncle Herbs on Arctic Spur, they've got a large backyard that's fenced. I mean, they could easily throw up a, you know, a greenhouse and do a summer crop. And so I keep hearing it's going to be difficult to do this in the winter. Yeah, that's obvious. It will be difficult to do it in the winter, but most of the existing outdoor and greenhouse operations don't operate in the winter. They operate and get one large crop out every summer. So if say, for example, Uncle Herbs wanted to put up a greenhouse in their fenced backyard area and kick out a crop once a year, I mean, that would give them a substantial business advantage, because they would have tons of joint rolling product. They would have tons of product that they could sell to a manufacturer to be ran into concentrate to use in their retail stores. That would be a real boost to them. And the light in Alaska is really cool because you don't have to just do 12 hours darkness and 12 hours of light. There's strains that are auto flowers, and so they don't need the light cycle. And so those auto flowers do really, really well in the midnight sun. And they can produce pretty good and pretty well actually. They don't need any light cycle. So one of my clients in Fairbanks is Rosy Creek Farms, and their operation is completely outdoor. They have a couple hoop houses, but they have 3 acres of marijuana plants that are auto flower that just grow under the midnight sun. And that's what they market as, grown under the midnight sun. Marijuana flower, auto flower, no light manipulation, nothing. And it's the type of strain, it's the type of genetic that allows it to do that. So, you know, I say this with the most respect and appreciation for government as I can, but you know, just because you can't imagine it doesn't mean it's not possible. And just because you don't think it's feasible doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to be able to make it make business sense. So there's a lot of places making this make business sense. Most of the states in the lower 48 do this routinely. I have a client in Arizona that has a large indoor facility, and then in the parking lot, they've permitted a large greenhouse just for growing for concentrate production. When federal legalization happens, unless there's some real modifications on the state level, and unless there's some kind of modifications in local government, it's going to be difficult for cultivators to compete, because you're going to be competing with largely outdoor facilities, largely greenhouses, largely facilities that use the natural sunlight to help power growing their plants, because utilities like energy is expensive, and this is a free energy. And yes, it can only be done once a year, unless you're really smart about it. And I have some clients that think that they can do year-round greenhouses, but we'll see how that works out. I think that would be difficult, but it can for sure be done once a year, and that's under our midnight sun that we have here, and it can be done with autoflowers. So again, with all the respect in the world, just because you guys can't figure it out and think that it makes business sense, believe me, this makes business sense for a lot of people, and a lot of people have done this before and done it well.
Thank you, Ms. Weltzing. Thank you for the perspective. And you answered two of my questions. And one was just in terms of, is there any interest? And then I did have some concerns about, well, how do you grow something if you need that darkness? How do you grow something outside in Alaska in the summer? But anyway, thank you for the information. Mr. Constant, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, thanks, Jenna. A couple questions. One, the threat to the industry that comes when you do get a licensed outdoor grow in the middle of downtown or in the middle of midtown, and then all of a sudden, the neighbors are furious because they're the ones who are bearing the burden of the smell. And then that translates into kind of aggression against the industry as a whole. Right? That's the fear that I see. It's not that it can't be done. Surely it could be done. I mean, my hometown where I come from, people send me pictures of their neighbors growing their 10 plants outside. It happens. I'm just afraid that we can't control for the one thing we hear the most complaints about, and that's odor. So that's my first issue that I would love to hear your 2 cents on. And then the second part, it's not marijuana, but it's hemp. And, I want to see the hemp industry be successful. And how does this conversation relate to that?
Okay, so for downtown, there's not any zoning in downtown that's going to allow for any cultivation. But for Midtown, I mean, yeah, it's not going to make sense for anybody. I mean, just given the sheer amount of vagrants and criminal activities to do this open grow downtown. Where it would make sense is a Quonset hut, where, and another place it would make sense is in an industrial area that has a fenced backyard that it can control access to and can have smell controls within the the greenhouse or the Quonset hut. I don't think it's going to be feasible in the city of Anchorage to do a straight outdoor grow with no barrier at all. I mean, I can't think of anywhere in the municipality where there's enough space like there is for my client in Fairbanks that has enough space to do that. But, for my client in Arizona, who's in an industrial area, who has smoke controls in their greenhouse, it works, right? And if somebody can't control the smell, I mean, we've seen this happen. They get fined over and over again, and ultimately they either fix the problem or go out of business. I mean, we've seen that. That's happened. So yes, I would not want something to be done that would hurt the industry, but I think you've got enough enforcement powers that if there was a problem, it would be fixed. I also don't think this is going to be, something where the downtown park strip is going to be turned into marijuana field. It would be an industrial setting, and it would be fenced, and maybe it would be a Quonset hut.
Right. And that, I mean, what you're talking about is Ship Creek, right? That's pretty downtown adjacent. There's lots of open land down there, but it's also surrounded by people, 1,000 feet in any direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the challenge I see. And I'm interested to hear how other communities outside of Alaska are dealing with this. I certainly don't wholesale say, let's not do it. The smell issue is the big barrier for me.
The the smell issue is difficult. You know, there are carbon filters and fans that go into greenhouses that are built for this. So it has been done before. Again, I agree. I don't think outdoor fields of marijuana in the municipality is going to work at all. So the hemp question, how does this play in with hemp? I mean, you don't really have, unless I'm mistaken, and maybe Mr. Yell can chime in, I don't see a conditional use process for industrial hemp in your Title 21. So I don't know what the community is going to do about that. So technically, that could be put up anywhere. I think that wouldn't be a great idea just to put it up anywhere because it looks like pot and it kind of smells like pot because it's very close to pot. So I don't know how this would interplay, but I know that you have to be careful about distances between the facilities, a hemp facility and a marijuana facility, because there can be some cross-pollination that can destroy either one of the crops. It can pollinate the marijuana crop and seed it out, or it can pollinate the hemp and turn it into marijuana. So something that I think you guys have to look into. And Rob Carter with the State of Alaska Agricultural Department, he is a wealth of knowledge about hemp. And so if the planning department is thinking about doing regulations about hemp and distances and whatnot, I think he should be your first stop for information. He's completely educated.
Thank you, Jana.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Ms. Weltzine. We've only got a few minutes left, and I've got 2 more people in the queue, and we need to have a few minutes for audience participation. So let's see, Mr. Yell.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I can be very quick. Just wanted to clarify, because I think I may have confused some folks. Just want to clarify that there is currently nothing in code that prohibits growing marijuana within a greenhouse. The caveat to that, though, is that the greenhouse has to have a valid certificate of occupancy and has to be constructed in accordance with building safety regulations. So that would be Title 23. So the scenario of somebody putting up a greenhouse within a fenced-in area and industrial property, that would be permitted subject to the approval of a special land use permit, but it could not be sort of a temporary structure. The reason being that would fall under fabric structures, and fabric structures are prohibited in Class A districts. So that would be your commercial districts and your industrial districts. So just to summarize, they could put up a greenhouse. It would just have to be constructed in accordance with Title 23, and it would have to have a valid certificate of zoning occupancy or zoning compliance. Second question, with the differentiating between marijuana and hemp, currently code just states marijuana. It doesn't really differentiate between marijuana and hemp. So that would just have to be something that would need to be clarified in code if there was a desire to make hemp cultivation an allowed use subject to some type of planning entitlement in Title 21. So thank you. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Mr. Yell. Something else to think about. Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates, I believe you had one last question, or?
Oh, well, just wanted to sort of get some direction. So the company has some direction. I'm not sure what it is, but I guess there's a couple options. We can state outdoor cultivations prohibited, or just prohibit the outdoor, expansive outdoor area, and allow greenhouses and fabric structures, perhaps in accordance with Title 21. Or the third option is just be silent completely. So I guess some direction from the committee is helpful for me.
Thank you. I agree, Mr. Gates. Okay, so comments on that. Really, what do we want to see in terms of outdoor cultivation of any type, whether that be greenhouse or cleared ground? What would we like to see in this portion of the amendment?
Well, I think Mr. Yell said a non-rigid structure probably wouldn't cut it. So looking at what Dean's proposed here, is that correct, Mr. Yell?
Through the chair, that's correct. Yeah, non-rigid would fall under fabric structures, which are prohibited in Class A districts.
So we need to exclude that part. So yeah, so no fully enclosed, non-rigid structure is going to be allowed. Yeah, currently we do have two different things going on here in the language that's in here, because the top part says outdoor cultivation or production is prohibited. The second part actually talks about what may take place. So we need to clean this up in some way, shape, or form. I mean, we can work on this more at the next meeting. If unless we have something very specific right now that we can leave Dean with to do before our next meeting.
May I make a suggestion?
Go ahead, Ms. Solotel.
Sure. I guess I would say outdoor cultivation or production in accordance with cite the state regulation, except where not compatible with Title 21. That's probably not the best language, but that's a starting point. So it says, let's do the state thing except for where Title 21 doesn't allow it. And then we can come back and figure out what that fully means and see if we want to add any additional restrictions or conditions from there. But that's us reconciling the state's option with Title 21.
Right. Thank you. No, I appreciate that language. And that's pretty simple, really, where it does leave the door open for potential, but everything's going to still be subject to current regulations in Title 21. So I appreciate that. Okay, so Mr. Gates, does that give you something to work with then before the next meeting? So we've kind of left
somewhat, I guess. I mean, the state regulation in accordance with it says it's allowed unless prohibited by the local government. So this language says we're not prohibiting it. I guess that works. And we just looked at Title 21 for exactly where we're allowed and where we're not. That works. Right. And then we'll give Mr. Yali a project.
No, that works. I think that's workable. And so anyway, if you put that in there, then we can always look at it again one more time next week. We can actually start here. But at this point, unless there's any other comments from the members, we're a little over, but we'll give some opportunity for audience participation. So any final member comments? Hearing none. Kiana, can you help me with audience participation? We can open that up, and I can just ask if there's anyone right now that.
Hello?
I hear a hello, so please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Eugene Carl Haberman. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. A couple of points. The first item that you had for business and you did a vote as a committee, you failed to have any opportunity for public comment, period. So you're taking that item before the assembly, directing it to the assembly with your approval without any public comment. Also, there's no identity. Again, you have the words, you have roll call, but introductions, you didn't indicate who's on the line from the public at all in the connecting with the meeting, and that's one important problem. And I'd like to address this. Over the years, I provided constructive criticism in the meetings I attend to, but I'd like to bring out something that you're not going to be able to get knowledge of real quick unless I address it. Because as you know, I multitask with a number of meetings, and as your meeting is going on, I'm listening attentively to what you're doing. There's a meeting out in the Matthew Borough where they're doing department presentations of their budget. I'm the sole member of the public there. When Anchorage introduced their budget administration and the Anchorage Assembly had a department presentation, the proposed budget was available to the public and you to see while the department presentations were going on. In the Valley right now, they're doing department presentations before the borough on the budget, but there's no proposed copy of the budget, and their hearings are a few weeks later. And I addressed before the Assembly this morning were that you need to have a copy, and they literally said on the record that it's not available for the public, and the hearings are going to be in a couple of weeks, and that's their annual budget. But a footnote that connects with you is As you know, I attend a lot of meetings, and one of them is dealing with the port in Anchorage, the Port of Alaska. And I went on the record today on the budget in the Valley to cut entire funds for the port in the Valley and give the full support for the Port of Alaska in Anchorage. And I called for a federal investigation of the operations and mismanagement that's been going on with the port in the Valley. And again, a note, I said, give the full support for the Port of Alaska in Anchorage and get away from the operations that's going on with the port in the Valley. I thank you for that, and I wish you the best. And boy, I'll just say this, boy, do I see a big difference between the way you operate and how lack of transparency the Valley is operating. But I think it needs to be noted at this time. Thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Is there anyone else online that wanted to participate from the public? And I'm not hearing anyone pipe in, so if there is no objection, this meeting will be adjourned as we are 6 minutes past our stop time.
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Second. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. All right, this meeting's adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.